Our next speaker is Sheldon Krimsky. Dr. Krimsky is Professor of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning in the School of Arts and Sciences, an adjunct professor in Public Health and Family Medicine in the School of Medicine at Tufts University. Professor Krimsky's research is focused on the linkage between science and technology, ethics and values, and public policy. He is the author of 8 books and has published over 175 essays and reviews that have appeared in many books and journals. He is currently completing a book under contract with Columbia University Press titled Genetic Justice, DNA Data Banking, Civil Liberties, and Criminal Investigation. Professor Krimsky served on the National Institute of Health's Recombinant DNA Advisory Committee. He was a consultant to the Presidential Commission for the Study of Ethical Problems in Medicine and Biomedical and Behavioral Research, to the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment. Professor Krimsky was chairperson of the Committee on Scientific Freedom and Responsibility for the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and is currently the chair of the Board of Directors for the Council for Responsible Genetics and a fellow at the Hastings Center on Bioethics. Professor Krimsky.
So we're going to have a few minutes break after this talk. Those of you who want to get something to drink and things. And so let's see, where are we here? Oh, okay. Slideshow. Well, after those two really fascinating talks, the biology of human biology and then human history, historical origins of race, I'm going to turn to some rather practical areas that have to do with race, racial disparities, and DNA data banks. First, I should say that, you know, unlike other scientific and technological revolutions, of which there have been, I don't know, maybe half a dozen, the genetics revolution is one that I've been able to observe and watch through my adult life. I place its origins in the discovery of recombinant DNA technology, because that's where we begin to see the transformation of genetics from an analytic discipline to a synthetic discipline, in the sense that you can now move genes around in different systems, and you can synthesize genes in ways that, you know, was impossible to do beforehand. And throughout this history, beginning in the early 1970s, and I think of all the advances that have been made in applied genetics, I can't think of anything that has been more important than the use of genetics, of DNA primarily, or DNA technology, to exonerate people who have been falsely imprisoned. Now, maybe that will change. Maybe somebody will discover some cures that will save the lives of millions of people with genetic technology, and I might change my attitude. But right now, the exoneration of over 200 people who've spent thousands of years in prison, falsely accused, falsely incarcerated, who have been exonerated, is to me an absolute marvel and the most significant contribution of biotechnology that we have thus far seen. So, given that that is a great benefit of DNA technology, I'm now going to turn to the growth of forensic DNA databanks, which really doesn't have much to do with the exoneration process, but has a lot to do with the way DNA is used in the criminal justice system. So let's start with the basic facts that there's been a growth of forensic DNA databanks All the industrialized nations now have established forensic DNA databases as part of their criminal justice and police administrations. Began in the United Kingdom in the mid-1980s, and then spread throughout the industrialized world. The databanks include some combination of felons, misdemeanants, arrestees, parolees. Different parts of different countries have different criteria for putting people on DNA databanks. Probably the most aggressive country in the world has been the United Kingdom. Anybody 10 years old or over can get put on the National DNA Databank, whether they're convicted of a crime or not, just arrested, and they get their DNA if they're over 10, and there's been some cases where they've been even under 10 and over 90 people who have been on the databank. The forensic DNA profiles that are entered on the databanks are collected either by local or federal police from biological samples obtained either voluntarily or involuntarily from the individual. Well, that's the basic state of the DNA databanking system. Now just a word about the racialization of the American criminal justice system. Based on the commonly used socially constructed concept of race, police identify people as white, black, Asian Americans, or Hispanics, and maybe there might be a couple of other categories. And it's my understanding that it's the police that actually mark the box. It's not the self-selection process that goes on in medical research where they ask somebody, well, what race are you, blah, blah, blah. The police actually do the markings, which is very interesting. On the basis of these classifications, racial disparities have been identified in all parts of the criminal justice system, from arrests, trial, access to legal services, conviction, sentencing, parole, exoneration, and execution. There isn't a place in the criminal justice system where racial disparities has not been identified. Well, the meaning of a racial disparity, and I'll use the word racial or ancestry disparity because, let's face it, not only does the concept of race have an illegitimate, there's no meaning, but we sometimes put into the box Latinos, God knows people sometimes call Jews a race, and anything else that they want to classify. And I must say, having read Hegel's Phenomenology of Mind, I think Hegel had it right. Taxonomies are useless or useful. They have no objective meaning in the universe other than beyond being useful or useless, and therefore don't take them too seriously. So by racial ancestry disparity, I shall mean relative to their numbers in the population, people of a minority race ancestry are more or less represented in the criminal justice categories than other groups. For example, Troy Duster reported that African Americans have been incarcerated at a rate approximately 7 times greater than that of Americans of European descent. Okay, that's a disparity then between two population groups. So now the question, of course, what our DNA can reveal when it's collected on the DNA database. It's collected as a profile. Well, there's actually 13 loci, and each loci there's 2 alleles. So there's 26 numbers, so we can all be reduced to 26 numbers. Something like 6, 12, 7, 9, and a string of those 26 numbers. That's us. Each of us, therefore, can be profiled with those 26 numbers. Of course, the local police departments keep the biological sample. So they have the 3 billion pairs of nucleotides that make up our genome. They have that in file as well. And that's where we certainly can find a lot of information about individuals, disease states, inherited genetic disorders, predispositional states, that is, mutations that correlate with the onset of a disease, parental linkages, who your parents are or aren't, ancestral identity, sort of the haplotype groups that you belong to, sibling connections, familial disease patterns, environmental and drug sensitivities. Increasingly, we're learning more about DNA mutations and drug sensitivities. Locational presence, that is, if you were or were not at a site, or you left one of your personal items at some site with your DNA on it. This is why people are concerned about the police having access not just to these 26 numbers, which don't tell you anything about your physical state or your medical state. It's not the 26 numbers that say anything. It's the biological material that remains with the police that people are holding up signs that say, "Hands off my DNA." Well, a word about the existing racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And then the question is, will DNA databanks contribute more or less, or will they be neutral in terms of racial disparities? Will they exacerbate the problem? Will they help solve the problem, et cetera, or are they just neutral? So existing racial disparities, that this is some of the latest data. 41 to 49% of the prison population are classified as African American. Even that number is hard to get precise down to, so that was the best I could do. While, of course, African Americans make up 13% of the US population, there's a disparity right there. African Americans make up 29% of people in prison for rape, and 64% of the people found wrongfully convicted of rape. This data came right out of the Innocence Project, where they have been keeping data on so-called racial data on exonerations. Osario and Troy Duster reported that the small number of dragnets carried out in the United States have targeted blacks. In 2001, 1 of every 20 African-American men over 18, compared to 1 in every 180 whites, was in a state or federal prison. And 62% of all prisoners incarcerated in the U.S. are either African-American or Latino, yet these groups make up only 25% of the nation's population. These are the kinds of numbers you see floating around in studies, reports, et cetera, which sort of underscore the racial disparities that exist. Now, the CODIS system, which is the system of DNA databanks across the United States. Now, every state has its own DNA databank, and it's all tied into the federal system called, which is now called CODIS. Unlike the United Kingdom, CODIS does not give data on the racial composition of its database. The British just publicize everything. They give you the breakdown of who's in what ancestral groups and racial groups are in the UK database, but nothing like that is published by the FBI. And the FBI argues that it only gets these 26 identifiers, and it doesn't actually have on its database any other identifiers about individuals on it. CODIS in the U.S. contains about 5 million DNA profiles from 50 states and the federal government. The UK has about 7% of its population on its national database. The U.S. has about 1.6% of its population. So you can see the UK